Hi there, Sherry here on the beautiful Silver Creek near Markleeville. I just spent the weekend here camping and I've been inspired to do a session here. So I'm going to talk about hyperthermia, so high body temperature. And hypothermia actually has a number under 95 degrees core body temperature. That is the definition of the start of hypothermia. Hyperthermia, on the other hand, doesn't have an actual number associated with it. It's just processes going on in the body that lead to heat exhaustion. And then we do have some tighter definitions for heat stroke. But we're going to start with just heat in general. So our body maintains a temperature of 98.6. And there's a ton of mechanisms that really start from the brain that keep our body in that pretty tight temperature range. And there's real little variation between humans. 98.6 is the sweet spot for sure. And so when we exercise vigorously in heat or otherwise, we can generate 10 times the amount of heat we do just sitting here. So while we're just sitting here doing nothing, our body is has a metabolism and is generating heat, and that's great. But when we're exercising, 10 times more than when we're just sitting here. So how do we get rid of that heat that our body is making so that we can maintain that 98.6? Well, we have to offload that heat somehow. And the same ways that we lose heat, conduction, convection, evaporation, radiation, exhalation, that's the way we're going to lose extra heat and hopefully keep our body in a safe zone. So conduction is direct loss of heat. So me sitting on a cold rock or a cold tile floor, that cold heat direct in contact with my body will suck heat away from me. So that's great. This also happens in water. When we dunk ourselves in water up to our neck, we are directly transferring our heat into the water. The water is taking our heat. And when we do that, we have heat just radiating off of us right now. So that's one of our ways of losing heat, radiation. And so we lose most of our heat radiantly from our head and our neck. And that's because, and our hands too, but that's mainly because when we have clothes on, this part of our body is open. So hats make a big difference. Scarves make a big difference if you're trying to keep heat in. And then gloves help also, right? If we're trying to keep heat in. Okay, so when we're in water, we can lose heat 35 times faster than we would just standing here in dry clothes. So that is very beneficial here in a setting where we're trying to deal with heat and heat overload, but also often a problem for hypothermia, right? So another thing we can do is harness convection. So another way of losing heat, convection, so wind passing by us or water mist passing by us that steals heat off our body as it goes by. So how can we use that to our benefit in a hot situation? A breeze, fanning somebody, or turning a fan on. Radiation, I just talked about, heat just emanating off of us. And so if we wear light, loose-fitting clothing that allows some air to pass through it, that's helpful in a heat situation. In a cold situation, we want stuff that's tighter on us to keep that heat in. Another thing is that for evaporation, darker skin actually absorbs more heat, just like dark clothing would absorb more heat. Evaporation, so sweating, that's one way that our body helps to calm down our temperature. And that evaporation off our skin is very, very helpful. Now, if you're sweating so profusely that it's just dripping off of you, that's not as helpful. We want it to be over the skin so that it can help pull that heat off of your skin. And then the last way we lose heat is through exhalation. So we lose hot air through our exhalation. So what really matters is heat index. And another way to talk about that is called apparent temperature. And heat index uses two things to decide what the heat index number is. That's more important than temperature or humidity alone. So we put it on a graph and we see how that combination of the two, what it feels like to our body. So that's apparent temperature or heat index. And so at about 80 degrees on the heat index, exercise becomes difficult. Over 90 degrees up to about 105 degrees, then we're looking at possible heat exhaustion. From 105 degrees to 130 degrees, heat exhaustion is pretty much imminent. And above 130 degrees, that's heat index. That's humidity plus or calculated humidity and temperature. In that situation, you're looking at heat stroke with pretty much any physical activity at all. So if we're sweating, that's great. And I already said dripping it off your skin, it's just falling off, running. That's not helpful. We want it to be on as much of our skin as possible. And if we're losing a lot of sweat that way, then we're possibly contributing to dehydration, another problem. So it's kind of a chicken and an egg thing too. If we're dehydrated, we can't keep cool on the inside either. So we need to care about all this stuff. A long distance runner who even is acclimatized to running in heat can lose 3.5 quarts, that's about 3.5 liters of water while sweating per hour. That's nuts. Now, our body really can only absorb about 1 quart of fluids per hour. So that's a problem. You can see that this person's going to get dehydrated really quickly. So for us, we need to keep up on at least 1 quart an hour during when we're exercising a lot. And really, if you're quite hot, that's not even that much. It doesn't seem like it, but our body can't really do much more than that. So we have to keep that in mind. Just drowning ourselves in fluids by drinking them is probably not that helpful and may make your nausea and other issues a little bit worse. Now, the mechanisms in our body to keep their temperature within normal range, sometimes our body gets overwhelmed by heat, especially when that heat index is quite high, and then things can go bad really quickly. And when they go bad really quickly, we're on this continuum of heat exhaustion to heat stroke. So heat stroke is life-threatening, and let's discuss the differences between heat exhaustion and heat stroke. Exhaustion to heat stroke, it's a continuum. It's basically our body is getting hot, can't offload the heat as fast as it is generating heat or bringing heat in, or not able to lose extra heat. And as the body temperature, the core body temperature is rising, if we can catch it early enough, we can fix it. But if not, or the environmental circumstances are making so much heat, or we can't lose the heat for whatever reason, that's when we head into heat stroke. So let's talk about the symptoms of the two ones. So heat exhaustion, and this is what most people suffer from, even though they say, oh, I had a heat stroke the other day. They probably didn't. They probably went to an ER, or hopefully went to an ER, because heat stroke is really tough to bring someone back from quickly, okay? So heat exhaustion is probably what they had. And so that is elevated body temperature without permanent damage to any organs or brain, things like that. So what does it feel like? Well, it feels like a fast pulse. It feels tired, sweaty, dizzy, nausea, don't want to drink anything, don't want to eat anything, a headache. All that stuff sounds familiar, yeah, for hot days. So the skin might feel cool, even though they are suffering from heat exhaustion. And so don't really worry about that. If they have those other symptoms, we still need to get them rehydrated and cooled down. They're probably sweating, but not necessarily. But most likely they are sweating. That's our body's way of trying to bring the heat down as quickly as possible. Now, on the contrast of that is heat stroke, and that truly is life-threatening. Our internal body temperature, our core body temperature is over 103 or 104 degrees. That's hot, right? That's a super high fever. And in this situation, it's not a high fever. It is your core body temperature is elevated in a hyperthermic situation, okay? So you're not having a fever that's trying to fight an organism or an infection in your body. This is an environmental problem. So in these situations where we really move over from heat exhaustion is the body temperature over 103 or 4, unless you have a rectal temperature with you, you don't know that. They no longer are sweating. Okay, so our body can no longer produce sweat after about 103 or 104 degrees. So if your buddy is not sweating, but everybody else is, and they certainly should be sweating with the environmental conditions that they're in, that's definitely a life-threatening problem. And then we usually get some kind of neurological impairment like confusion, seizure, trouble talking, not thinking right. So the brain is really the eggs are being scrambled up in there, and we need to get them cooled as soon as possible in both situations. But a heat stroke with the neurological problems and that really elevated body temperature, that is a life-threatening situation. Also, with heat stroke, you can get what's called rhabdomyolysis, and that is the body breaking down tissue and spilling it out into the urine. So the urine has bilirubin in it and it looks like iced tea. That is no good. We're not talking about dark urine when you wake up and pee. We're not talking about that. We're talking about tea-colored urine, okay? And so that is definitely a symptom that the kidneys are starting to fail trying to deal with the situation at hand. Now, in a heat stroke, they will probably, like I said, they'll probably not be sweating, probably dry, very hot skin. As the temperature is rising and we're not doing anything to cool it down or to help bring that temperature down, it just becomes this vicious cycle and it just keeps getting worse. Once the body temperature hits about 106, it just skyrockets up. The brain is frying and we're in a really, really bad situation. So it can just keep skyrocketing up. So we need to catch it as soon as possible. So we need to cool these people down quickly. What are the best ways to do that? Let's talk about that. So in a heat stroke or heat exhaustion situation, we need to cool them down as quick as possible. So I say in hypothermic situations, we need to warm slowly, because we're concerned about the heart. But in these situations, we're concerned about the brain, and we need to cool the brain down as quick as possible. It's frying up in there like a scrambled egg, okay? So we need to cool them first, and then we need to transport out. So in this situation, we need to get the body temperature down closer to 98.6 as quickly as possible. So how do we do that? We're going to remove anything they don't need to have on. So we're talking about down to the skivvies, hat off, socks off, shoes off, down to their underwear, essentially. And then we need to harness all of those ways of heat loss, like conduction, convection, evaporation, radiation. We need all that stuff. So we're going to first get them out of any direct sunlight. The sun is very powerful and hot. So we're going to get them into a shaded situation, and we're going to remove all the unnecessary bandanas, headbands, clothing, all that stuff. And then we're going to start cooling the skin. So the number one way to do this is to dunk in cold water. And so we would go up, and this is somebody who can follow commands and isn't stumbling or stuporous, right? They can help us. We're going to sit them in the river, make sure they don't go underneath their airway, or their airway doesn't go under the water. They're going to sit there. And if you remember, that cold water is stealing body heat 35 times faster than if they were just sitting here trying to cool down. So getting them in the water is the best way if they neurologically can handle it. If that's not possible, you don't have water, or the person is too confused, the next thing to do is to wrap them in wet, preferably cold wet, sheet, clothing, whatever. So we've already have them down to their skivvies, and we're going to put a wet sheet, hopefully with ice on it if you have it, but cold, wet water, however that is, over top of as much skin, covering as much skin with the sheet or the towel or the clothing, whatever you can have that you can wet. Across their head, around their neck, chest, arms, torso, everything. Okay, so we're going to try to cool them down that way. Also, if you were not in an outdoor environment like this, you could have them sit on a cool tile floor or something like that. That will help conduct that heat right into the cold tile or cold rock that was in shade. Another thing we can do is ice packs. So ice packs to the axilla and to the groin. Ice packs around the neck too. Remember, we never put ice directly on the skin, and we're not going to obstruct their airway. So maybe ice packs here on the sides, underneath the axilla and at the groin. And ice is better than ice packs. But again, you're going to use whatever you have. But actual ice in a Ziploc, something like that, is great. And then there's another one that's recommended in this book right here, which is called a tarp bath. And so you lay a tarp down, put the victim in on top of the tarp, pull the sides of the tarp up with other people, so you're making like a little shallow bathtub, and then pour water into that. What happens is that water is sitting around, mostly on the victim's back, but they are having that heat being sucked away, especially if you don't have much water to work with. So that's a good way to do that. Make sure the airway is protected in that situation. In all situations, we're protecting the airway. Sponging a patient off, if that's all you have to do, great. It's just not very effective. So we want to drape a towel or a sheet or clothing, whatever we have over top of them. Please do not try to sponge them off with alcohol. That's like an old wives' tale. And then a breeze. So fanning them off, putting them in a breezy, shaded situation, turning fans on if you have access to that. But that only works if the skin is damp. Okay, so if they're not sweating and you just give them a fan, that's not doing much, right? So we need to have wet skin and then convection going in addition to that. So that fan works really well in humid situations. So if you have a rectal thermometer, you want to check their temperature every 5 to 10 minutes to make sure that their temperature is coming down. So we're going for a goal of 98.6, but if they start shivering uncontrollably, we're probably pretty good. But we want to keep checking their temperature because it can start to rise. Even up to 4 hours later, they can have a rebound hyperthermic episode. So we do need to keep an eye on that. Once we get them down and they're like pretty much back to normal, then maybe checking their temperature every 30 minutes or so. But we do want to keep an eye on that. We certainly don't want to go back to where we were. And then no Tylenol or ibuprofen or anything like that. This isn't a fever unless there is some sort of infectious process going on. But if it's heat related, there's no reason for any of those medications. They're not going to work anyways. This is an environmental situation that we need to take care of. And then we need to deal with hydration because they're probably dehydrated, and that's part of the problem of what's going on. So we do need to rehydrate them with fluids called oral rehydration, oral meaning the mouth. And then we absolutely need to do this if their urine is getting dark. Now, we only have somebody drink fluids who can pay attention to us, follow our commands. They're breathing on their own, all of that kind of stuff. We would never be pouring water in someone's mouth or trying to get someone to drink something when they can't really follow our commands. Okay, so hopefully we're catching them before we got to that point. So fully conscious and following commands, we will have them drink water. And what about electrolyte drinks like Gatorade or something like that? Those are good. They do have sugar. Our body needs sugar. The metabolism is very high, so sugar is great. Has electrolytes in there, salt, potassium, magnesium, and things like that. But most Gatorade drinks have too much sugar for our body to handle. Okay, shocker, right? So 1-to-1 mixture. So half Gatorade, half water. Mix it up and have them sip on that. They don't need to guzzle it. We're just getting some in, and we're going for about a pint. 1 to 2 quarts. So that's about 1 to 2 liters over the first hour. So if they're nauseated, they're not going to be able to take it very well. Maybe if they're nauseated, this happened to me before, this is how I had to drink the first couple sips. Spit it out, and all it did was wet my lips and my tongue and my gums. But my body was absorbing it. After a couple times of that, then I was able to get a tiny sip in. Teeny tiny. And then later was able to get more and more. As my body temperature came down, my anxiety came down, my nausea started to go away. Even if you just swish a liquid around in your mouth and have to spit it out because you can't swallow it, just repeatedly doing that, you will absorb some fluid through that. Now, I already talked about the half Gatorade, half water situation, 1-to-1 mixture. We're going for 1 to 2 quarts or liters in that first hour, and then over the first few hours. Over the first few hours, and it might take a full day and a half to fully rehydrate. Okay, so this is a slow process that we're working on. All right, the last part of heat stuff is muscle cramps. So really I could have started with muscle cramps because that's usually where things start. So this would be a situation where you're exercising and your muscles do not have enough water and salt, so sodium. So in that case, your muscles cramp up and you can't go on. So you need to take a break. So this happened to me one time on the John Muir Trail. I was climbing a pass, big pass. We were trying to summit the pass and get over to the other side before 1 p.m. And as I was climbing up that hill, my calves cramped up. They got so hard as a rock. I literally couldn't go on. So I sat down and let the muscle just sort of soften up again. That took probably 5 minutes. And then after that, I was able to very gently massage it, but it was so tense and it hurt a lot. So very, very gentle. And then I was able to get a little bit more over time. I was also taking water in and getting electrolytes in me as well, because this is happening because of low salt. So massaging the muscle and then starting to stretch that muscle and try to get it back to normal. And so you can also put ice. I didn't have that option where I was on this pass, but you could put ice there, not directly on the skin, of course, but trying to calm and cool that down. Now, as far as salt replacement, if you are eating regular food, you shouldn't need any salt replacement. But what happens is you're out there working really hard, you're climbing passes, you're working construction, and you're just not eating your normal amount. That's when we really need to add salt back into our water. And so we don't ever want to take tons of water without electrolytes. Conversely, we don't want to take a bunch of electrolytes if we don't have water. So you would never like eat an electrolyte powder without being well hydrated. Okay, so we need these two things to come together. So if you're going to add salt, you can add about a teaspoon of, half teaspoon of salt to a liter of fluid. That's it. We're not putting a whole bunch in there. It's just going to have a slight salty flavor. So a liter of fluid, half teaspoon of salt. If you had some sort of potassium, that'd be great too. Again, this is a situation where you're really trying to replace salt because you're having muscle cramps and you don't have electrolytes, Gatorade, that kind of thing. Another one you can do here is just water, some salt, and a banana. Nature, right? There's potassium in that. There's other nutrients as well. But that's another way rather than using electrolytes. And then the last one that I do want to talk about is heat swelling. And that can happen with elderly people who are walking or sitting and resting, really, in a seated position. The fluid builds up in the legs during a time of high heat. So as long as they're not having trouble breathing, which could be congestive heart failure or something like that, and as long as there's no redness that looks like an infection or pain in the calf, something like that, which can be other problems. If it's just swelling, then we and they've been in heat, so there's like an environmental thing going on. Then we can think that it's just coming from heat, called heat swelling, and we would do what we would do with anything swollen and hot. We would elevate it, we would rest, and if they have access to support hose that keeps the lower part of the feet, ankles, and legs tight, we want that to go over the knees. So compression stockings that come to here are not the greatest. They make problems right here at the bend of the knee. So we do want that compression to go all the way up over the knee to help. It's very important that we prevent heat exhaustion and heat stroke. So how do we do that? Well, we need to pre-hydrate. We know it's going to be hot. We know we're not going to be in shade, all of those things, right? We're going to think about the clothing that we're going to wear. We're going to wear things that are breathable, like cotton, not tight fitting. We're going to dress in layers so we can, take things off and put things on as we need to. We could wet lower layers. We could bring bandanas and things to put around our neck. We don't want to wear a hat unless we need sun protection because that's keeping a ton of heat in there. But you could do a wetted light bandana that you can, if you have a possibility of continuing to wet it and keep it wet. So pre-hydration, we want to drink about a pint before we get into the situation, and then about a pint to a quart, so a half liter to a liter every hour per hour while we're in the situation. If our urine starts to get dark, that's an indication that we have not drank enough fluid. Okay, so we want to get more fluids in us. If we're sweating normally, if we're eating normally, we shouldn't need to replace the salt, but if we need to, I gave you the mixtures of how to do that. Now, if you drink too much water and not add salt, you can lead your body into hyponatremia, low salt levels in the blood. And that actually can be life-threatening and even fatal. And so it starts with difficulty speaking, like the brain's not working right, difficulty speaking, dizziness, headache, weak all over, nausea, vomiting. It can progress to way worse situations like seizures, confusion, even shortness of breath if the fluid levels in the lungs get all messed up, okay? So this is a big deal. And so we want to prevent this from happening by getting some electrolytes and salt in us. And the best way, again, is just eating normally. But if you need to add electrolytes and salt, go ahead and do that. We want, as far as prevention, limit alcohol, caffeine, coffee, caffeinated teas, things like that. Those do not help us. So we want to get fluid in other ways. Oh, I had a big pint of coffee before we went out. I'm good. Nope, that water doesn't count because the caffeine, the alcohol, those things are dehydrating. Children and the elderly, they cannot as well regulate their own body temperature. So we really need to think about that. We wouldn't be bundling children up because they can't lose the heat. They can't, we do need to help them make heat. But in a situation like this where it's hot out, do not keep them bundled up. They need to be able to lose some heat. So at least leave their feet out, light, loose blankets and clothing on them, just like we would do for ourselves, but keep a close eye on them. And then clothing, I talked about this a little bit. Layers, lightweight, absorbent, no hat unless you need the sun protection. And then you want the hat to be able to be breathable. So nothing like a leather cowboy hat. Sorry, cowboys, not the greatest thing, really. There's no way to get that heat out. They need like little vents and a fan in there. But it looks good. Looks real good. And then we definitely want to, with sunscreen though, keep our face, our neck, and maybe bits of our torso out so that the convection can help. We want to allow for that evaporative heat loss. Okay, well, I think we've talked about all we need to for heat exposure. So I want you to take this minute, grab a sheet of paper. I want you to write down 3 key points, okay, that you're going for. Okay, thanks so much. I hope you had a great time listening to this. I had a great time sitting here in this beautiful location here in Markleeville, and my best to you.